So hi everyone, I'm Soham. I'll be talking about material design 2 and the tooling aspects of material design. So let's get started. Quick introduction to myself. I'm the founder of this company called Trivius. We have this audio recording platform called Skyro Voice Recorder. It's there on the Play Store, it's there on different platforms, and we have more than 1 million downloads, and that's what I do full time. Apart from that, I'm also part of Blrdroid, one of the organizers behind this event. So hopefully you're enjoying this event as well. I'm also a UX and Android consultant, worked on various applications, worked with some of these companies. I'm also one of those people who likes to design as well as to develop, right? One of those people who likes both of these things. Okay, so let's get started. So what is the agenda for today? We'll talk about material design 2.0, of course, but I'll focus more on the tooling side and the component side. And I'll tell you why that is important and what is Google's strategy behind it. Okay, that is going to be the interesting part of the presentation. Before that, let's start with material design 1.0. Okay, I'm sure Faiz had covered this yesterday, but like any other product, once a product is launched, you should go and get feedback on the product itself. Right? So material design was launched a couple of years back, and the Google team went to different companies and got a lot of feedback on material design. Was it working for them? What were some of the challenges? What could be made better? Right? They spoke to a lot of different people. They spoke to designers, developers, and people across the board. And they got a lot of feedback. Okay? Again, Faiz covered this in a bit yesterday. So on the left-hand side is the Trello application. Okay? Any feedback? What are your thoughts on the Trello application on the left-hand side? Any thoughts on it? Anybody?
It looks like gallery.
It looks like gallery? Which gallery? Like the gallery app? Yeah. So it looks very generic in nature, right? Like any application from the material design guidelines. If you see Trello on the web, it has a very distinct personality, right? It has its own character, its own message. But if you see it on Android, it looks very generic, like any other application, right? What about the app on the right-hand side? Anybody? Enhanced version of the left-hand side? It looks, again, very, very similar to the design guidelines. This is not a mock-up app, it's a real application. Okay, that was there on the Play Store. And again, it looks very generic in nature. It looks very, very similar. So that's the first piece of feedback that Google received. All these applications were very generic in nature. It looked all the same if they were following material design guidelines. This is another application. It's an application called Remember. Which application does this remind you of? Yeah? Sorry? YouTube, okay. What else? Play Store, okay. Google Drive, Google Docs, right? Very, very similar, right? So again, looks like a lot of the Google applications as well. This app? Yeah? Instagram, okay. Google Plus? Anybody remembers Google Plus? Looks very similar to that, right? So it looks a lot like the Google properties, and even Google apps look similar to each other, right? That was one of the main feedbacks that Google received. And basically the brand value, right? The message was not being delivered very, very clearly. And Google spoke to a lot of different people, including designers and developers. So from designers, they got feedback like, the brand presence is just not there. Another piece of feedback they got was the tooling was not there. If you're a designer, the guidelines on the site are very good, but the tooling to get started with it and create a material design application was just not there. You had to make a lot of extra effort to do that. The benefits of material design were again not very clear. Why should I implement material design? What is the benefit to me? And finally, a lot of it is very theoretical in nature. So if I'm building an e-commerce application, it doesn't tell me how I can just take my brand and show it in material design. Now this is where it becomes interesting. How many developers in the room today? Almost everybody, right? What is your experience with material design? This is a question that Google asked a lot of developers. The first is, it's difficult to follow material guidance. Is it something that you agree with? It's difficult to implement material design prototypes and designs, right? Why? Why is that the case? Anybody? right? Strict guidelines, okay. Because the implementation was not there, maybe, right? Because they were just guidelines. There was not a lot of support from their side. And especially if the code was there, it was not really open source in many cases. So you're left to fend for yourself, right, in many cases. On other platforms like the web, there were many third-party implementations, right? If you go to Angular on the web, there are many implementations of material design, mainly because there's not like a good first-party solution. And finally, it's not open source, so it's not really extensible. So if you're creating something really custom, like a custom chip element, right? It's very difficult to find that and kind of customize it. This is some of the feedback they received. They received a lot of other feedback, which is very general in nature. For example, it's always difficult for designers and developers to communicate with each other. The designer creates something and then takes that. It's very difficult for the developer to take that design and kind of implement it, right? This is a traditional problem, nothing to do with material design. But once they spoke to designers and developers, they came up with this. There were other issues with workflows as well. They found out that if you have to build a solution and increase the adoption of material design, you have to make it part of designers and developers' workflows, right? You can't just create the guideline and expect people to just follow along. And finally, a lot of people were also interested in the design basics. They understood the guidelines, but they wanted to know the science and the theory behind it, right? Especially the decision makers. So this is what resulted in Material Design 2. They received a lot of feedback from different people, and they brainstormed on it and figured out how to solve it. So they came up with Material Design 2. So what is Material Design 2? It's a design system, just like before. What is the design system? It's basically a framework of guidelines, of assets, of tools that you can use for design purposes. But Material Design 2 is also very practical in nature. What do you mean by practical? Let's say I'm building an e-commerce application, right? And I have just 2 months to implement it. I have to create an iOS app, I have to create an Android app, I have to create a web app, and I just have 2 months to implement this. Now, if you do all of this design plus implementation yourself, it will take a lot of time. But if you use Material Design 2, it provides not only the design guidance, right? It provides you all the implementation details. It provides you a lot of research, a lot of tests that you don't have to do yourself. It just helps you do your work in a much easier way, right? It will help you get to market much, much quicker. That's why it's a very practical system. It's not just about the theoretical design aspects. It's also very extensible. As Faiz talked about yesterday, it's all about your brand, your message. So a lot of these components that they have created, it's not just guidelines, it's also components. It's all open source. You can take it, you can extend it, you can make it your own. And finally, it's also cross-platform. So one of the opinions that I've seen, right, like many people think material design is Google's design guidance or Android's guidelines, right? Don't you think that? But that's not true. It's completely cross-platform in nature. It's a very important thing to understand. Just like Google, right? It has a lot of applications like YouTube and Gmail and so on. And they have these apps across different stores, right? It's there on the App Store, it's there on the web, it's on desktop, laptops, everywhere. Material design also follows the same philosophy, right? It cannot just be on Android or on Google properties. It's a cross-platform approach. In fact, a lot of their guidelines and implementation details are very specific to iOS as well, right? And they have guidelines for wearable devices, for Flutter, and for so many other platforms out there. It's also backed by solid research. Let me give you an example. This is one of the new edit text fields, right, in Material Design 2. And it has this box around it, box or outline. Have you seen this? Right? It's a newer way of entering text. It's there in the Material Design guidelines. And you might be wondering, how did they come up with this? It's not like somebody just woke up and said, OK, I'll just put a border around the text field, and that's it, right? They have put in a lot of research to make sure this is actually usable. That means they have designed this, and they've iterated on it. They have tested this with people across the world and to make sure that people can understand that this is something I can interact with, I can enter text in it, right? It's not just another element that I don't know how to interact with. So simple things like this have a lot of research behind it. And Google has spent months and years in doing this, and I have a huge team of researchers just doing this. So every single element in Material Design 2 that's there in the guidelines has gone through this design process, this whole research process. Apart from that, Material Design 2 also has one of the widest footprints in terms of device, platform, and workflow support. And I've added a star there because this is just in my opinion, right? What do I mean by this? Like I said, it's not just about one platform, like Android or iOS. It's about the entirety of the ecosystem. And it's not just about the design guidelines. Google has also created components for you. So if you want to create that text field in Android, you have the code available. If you want to do it in iOS, you have the code available. So it's not just about giving you guidelines, it's about making sure that that's available for you in terms of coding, right? Which is why I say it's got the widest footprints for different platforms, different devices, and different workflows. So that is a bit about Material Design 2.0. It's a design system with all the principles I talked about. There is new guidance in terms of material theming, which Faiz talked about yesterday. So you can take your idea, your message, and make it into an application or design, right? And Material Design will support you for that. Have you seen this? This is like one of the case studies from Google. It's a very theoretical application, but it's basically a recipe application. It's called Basil. And you can see how it's very distinctly foodie in nature, right? It's all about searching for recipes and discovering food items. You can see that the fonts are custom, the colors, and everything else is very, very uniquely foodie. Another case study is on the trip application called Crane. You can book travel and trips on this application. And this also has a very distinct personality to it, right? It doesn't look like a generic application on the store. This is another application. It's a social media application for millennials. You can see the bright colors that millennials like. And you can see, again, it's very, very unique. It doesn't look like any of the other case studies, right? And that is the message of Material Design 2.0. This is another application. This is a news reading application, but it's very formal, right? Very clear. It's all about the news. There is custom typography, so it doesn't look like roboto everywhere, right? It's very, very clean that way. And Google has also understood that it's not just about giving you guidelines like all your body text should be 14 SP in size. It understands that if you're using a custom font like Merriweather, the font size, the default guidelines that you should have will also change, right? It's not going to be 14 SP everywhere because 14 SP in roboto might not be 14 SP in Merriweather. And what's important to understand here is that they've not made it just clear in the guidelines. They've actually done this in tooling. So if you're using a designer tool or a developer tool like Android Studio, it's there in the tooling itself to help you adjust the scale of your fonts. There are also a lot of custom elements in Material Design 2, like this chip, right? So Google has launched chips a while back in the Material Design guidelines, but now you can see how you can completely customize it. And so I'll talk about components in a lot more detail, and this is a very important part of Material Design 2. And the last important part of Material Design 2 is tooling, which helps you developers as well as designers to improve their workflow, right? So in totality, these are the different things in Material Design 2. And I want to focus on the component part and the tooling part, right? That is the focus of this talk. Let's start with components. So one of the pieces of feedback that you've seen from developers in Material Design 1 was that a lot of the implementation for material design components was not there. That means if somebody tells you, like a designer tells you, you have to make this fab, or this fab should do this, or you have to make a chip which looks like this and functions like this, you have to go and do that yourself for the most part, right? In Material Design 2, that's not the case. That's the first piece of feedback that they've listened to. And they've hired a lot of developers, right? There are over 100 developers in the Material Design team right now. It's a design team, but there are over 100 developers in it. Why? Because they're creating open source components for you, right? So there are now components for Android, iOS, web, React, and Flutter. right? So it's truly a cross-platform approach to problem solving. And it's called Material Design Components, or MDC in short. It's also completely open source in nature, so you can go to GitHub and check it out, right? All the projects are open source. Why is that important? Because you can see how things work. You can figure out what are some of the problems in it, right? You can debug it. You can contribute to it. They have excellent contribution guidelines. So in case you find a bug in the Android design library, you can go to GitHub and actually fix it, right? You can submit a fix. And I've seen so many people contributing to the MDC in the last few days. It's also constantly updated. It's not like the last few material design libraries, which were updated once in a month or once in a quarter. This is a snapshot from day before yesterday. It was updated in the last 3 hours or last 10 hours. So it's updated almost daily. So if there is some new guidance in terms of material design, you will find that in the implementation in MDC very, very, very soon. It's also extensible in nature, and that's the beauty of open source, right? You can take the code, and in case you want to do something really custom with it, you can do it, right? Now, what do I mean by this? I will just show you this with an example. So this is a chip, right? These are all custom chips, this specific part, right? These are chips in Android. And there is obviously great design guidance on chips. So you can go to the website and check this out. They've always had great documentation on the design side. But what's really different over here is that they've got great developer documentation. Now, this developer documentation is not like your typical API documentation that's there on Android. It's a little bit of a hybrid between a design and developer doc, right? I like to think of it as an interpretation of the design doc for developers, right? What do I mean by that? So you can go and create a simple chip, which is very, very straightforward. But apart from that, right, the design document talks about very specific kinds of chips. For example, this is an entry chip. So if it's an edit text, you can just type something, and it auto-completes and makes it into a chip, right? This is a use case. You've seen this in Inbox, Gmail, and so on. So in the design, this is called the entry chip. It's a very specific kind of chip. Now, if you go to the developer documentation, for the first time, you'll actually find a very specific guidance for the entry chip. You're not asked to create just a chip and then extend it yourself. You will find the exact same reference to chip, right? So if you have an entry chip in design, you'll have the same entry chip in the developer documentation. That is material design too, right? It's not asking you to kind of find your way. It's helping you kind of do your job. And this is true across the board. If you have filter chips, this is another kind of chips in the design doc, you'll find the same thing inside the developer documentation as well. So there's almost a one-to-one mapping between design and developer documentation. This is an action chip. And again, this is also there in the developer doc. And finally, this is a choice chip, where you can select one of many chips. And you might expect this now. It's also there in the documentation. Now, this is all great, right? As an Android developer, it's very easy for us to kind of implement this. But what's great is the same choice chip exists in iOS as well, right? The same documentation exists, and the same library is there, which is open source. It's also there on the web, right? So you don't have to go to third-party libraries and figure out how to make a choice chip. It's there on Flutter. In fact, on Flutter, it's a first-party component. You don't even have to kind of import a library or anything else. You can just use it. So they have it as part of their documentation. So this is the overall strategy of material design too, right? It's no longer just about the design part of it. It's about helping you implement the design in a very, very easy way, right? Because if you don't do that very easily, you'll give that feedback to your designers, and they will say, okay, it's very difficult to use material design. And that's what Google has done, right? They have made your life easier by creating all these open source components. Okay. Next, I'll talk about tooling. So Google has also invested a lot in different tools that are available. The first tool that I'd like to talk to you about is the Material Theme Editor. It's basically a Sketch plugin right now. Sketch is a tool that designers use for designing applications and services. And Material Theme Editor is just a plugin for that that helps designers create designs very, very effectively and easily, right? So let me show you a quick demo of Material Theme Editor. Okay, so this is Sketch. This is a Mac only app right now, but Google is adding this plugin to different platforms as well. So you'll see it for other third-party solutions very, very soon. Okay, so it's a new project in Sketch. I've not done anything. I've just installed the Material Design Theme Editor plugin. Okay, so once you do that, you'll have this option for a plugin inside your inside Sketch itself. So you can go over there and open Theme Editor. Okay, so these are some of the projects that I've already created with Theme Editor in the past. What I'll do is, for this demo, I'll just create a new theme. So once you click on that, it'll give you options for selecting various themes, right? So as I talked about, there are different case studies on the Material website, like the travel application I was talking about, there's a news application, and then there's an e-commerce application called Shrine. So you can select any of these as your baseline. So in case you're creating a design, you can start with any of these themes. So let me just start with Shrine. Once you click OK, it'll just ask you that you want to save it in a certain location. Let me say Shrine, okay, and save it. So when I click on Save, it's basically creating all the assets, like all the symbols, assets, like fonts, everything that I really need, and it's creating a project out of that, right? Which is really, really cool. Okay, so this is how it looks. You can see that it's created a theme UI for me. It's given me some sample pages that I can use. It's created a typographic scale for me, where you can see the sizes of different fonts and types. You can see it's created a color scheme for me. It's created, elevation diagrams. It's created system icons, product icons, and so on, right? So everything that I would typically do as a designer, I would have to create this typographic scale. I would have to create this color scheme. It's created for me. Apart from that, it also creates a lot of symbols. These are the basic building blocks of my design. So I can just zoom in and show you this. Right? There are tons and tons of such symbols that it has pre-created for me, right? So in case I click on something, right, this is how it would work. So there are so many symbols that it has created for me, like dialogues and bottom sheets and so on and so forth. So every possible combination of design that's there in Material Design is created for me right at the very beginning of my design workflow. So it's a really interesting tool, right? So let's explore this further. So this is the default design that it provides you. And this is an e-commerce application. It's a very edgy, modern e-commerce application. And this on the right-hand side is the Material Theme Editor. Okay, so over here you can do things like change the primary and secondary colors. So let me change the color of the application over here. I'll just choose a shade of blue. So as soon as I change that color, right, in the theme editor, the whole application, the whole project updates itself automatically. I don't have to do anything. So it's not just like static styles that are there, it's like a dynamic thing, right? So my primary color looks good, right? I've selected some blue. I'll change the secondary color to a shade of yellow. Right? And you can see that cascades throughout the application. Now, it's not just a very simple color picker. I was speaking to Josh from the Material Design team, and he was telling me this color picker is very, very complex. It's not just a simple algorithm. They've spent a lot of time. There's this team of developers who had to work for weeks to create this color picker because it's thinking like a designer. Right? The color picking is done like a designer and not just like a simple algorithm. I'll show you, right? So I'll give you an example of that. You go over here and you can see that this piece of text is not really legible, right? Because the foreground text is like a purple and doesn't go with that blue. It's not very, very legible. Imagine having so many of these outliers in your designs and you have to fix it. So how can you do that, right? You can go to your color. And you have this option of selecting a text color. Right? By default, it's a shade of maroon or purple. I click on it, and this dialog opens up. Over here, it gives me an option to select accessibility right over there. It's telling me that check the color contrast of your base swatch for WCAG level AAN. It's basically telling me that your foreground font color is not accessible. It's not visible to people of a certain contrast level. So WCAG is basically a standard for accessibility in terms of like contrast. And it tells me that it's not really accessible. That means people of a certain disability cannot see this font, right? And it gives me an exclamation mark telling me that you should change this. And then it says your text does not meet a contrast ratio of 4.5:1. You need to fix this. I can just click on this, and then it gives me an option for changing the color right there itself, right? So I click on OK, and it updates the whole design on its own, right? And there's a lot of science that goes behind this. It's not just selected a red or a purple or other colors. It selected this white because it looks really good with blue, right? A lot of research has gone behind this. And it gives you different accessibility standards. AA is just one standard. AAA is another standard from WCAG. You can see I still have to fix some stuff there, right? So it's a very intelligent color picker, right? Apart from this, you can check the contrast for the other secondary color as well, and that looks fine to me, right? Yeah, great. Apart from that, you can also change your type, because type is so important in Android and all these other platforms. It's giving you options to change this right in the design stage. So over here, I can go and change the font. By default, I think it's Rubik, which is selected. I can go and select any other font that I like. For example, I really like Allegria Sans. It's another font. And you can see how it's changed that across the app, right? It's no longer Rubik. My typographic scale has changed. The fonts in the dialogues have changed. It's basically cascaded this change across the whole application, across the whole project, right? And you can individually change different styles, which is another really cool thing. Apart from that, another really cool aspect is changing the curvature of different items. For example, you have dialogues which are very angular in nature. You might want to make them round. So in this case, so Shrine is a very edgy application. That's why you see these sharp corners. What I'll do is my application, my e-commerce application is not that edgy, so I want to make it into a curvature, right? So it's like curved at different places. And just by making it curved over here, you can see how the dialogues have changed, right? Not sure if it's very visible, but yeah. And everything, even the bottom sheet has changed. You can see how it's now rounded in a certain way. And of course, you can customize, you can play around with this, and I'll make it even more rounded, right? You can see just by making this round, this thing is also changed, right? So all these design decisions in terms of curvature and how it cascades into different elements like chips and dialogues and so many other elements are automatically done for you. So it makes the life of a designer really, really easy, right? The final thing is system icons. So Google has also updated its system icons to different styles like fill, sharp, rounded, outline, and so on. In case you want to use those, you can use it directly from here. So that was a quick look at the material theme plugin for Sketch. And let's go back to our presentation. Okay, let's look at the second tool that they have created. This is called Gallery. How many of you have heard of Gallery before? Okay, a couple of you, great. So this is a very interesting tool. For one thing, it's not related to material design at all, okay? Which is very interesting, right? You might be thinking, why is Google spending time and creating a tool which has nothing to do with material design? But the answer is that, you know, if you are happy using this tool, if you are happy using some of the other components that they have created, it'll make your life easier, and you will recommend it to your designers. And somewhere, right, there is this trickle effect of adopting material design. It's a very long-term plan, but it actually works. So what is Gallery? Gallery is basically a tool to help design developer transfers. So your designer can give you designs in a much better way, and you can collaborate and figure out how to implement that design. So let me give you an example of that. So first, let's go back to Sketch. So let's say I've created this design, and it looks really good. Right from within Sketch, I can go and export this entire design to Gallery. Right? Although Gallery is a web tool, you can upload all your designs to Gallery right from within the theme editor. And once they release it for other platforms, it will be available there as well. Right? I'm not going to upload it to Gallery right now because the internet connection is not great. So let me show you how Gallery looks like. Right? So this is a sample project in Gallery. Gallery is at gallery.io. You can go and sign up for it. It's a free tool, and it's available to everybody. This is a sample project, so whenever you upload your first design, it creates this sample project for you, so you can go and explore it. So, like any other project, it has a description, title description. You can add tags to it. In case your organization has a lot of designs, you can organize it in a very easy way. You can also share it with other people. So if you've got designers and developers on your team, you can invite them. It can be a private project, and you can collaborate. What's cool over here is that you can organize your designs based on different parameters. In this case, I'm organizing it by form factor. So you have mobile, tablets, and desktop, and there are different designs. Let me show you how this looks. Okay, so let me just click on mobile. Let's hope the internet works. Okay, the internet is definitely not working. Okay, so let's just bear with me while I fix this. Okay. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay. Okay. It's probably gonna work or not. Okay, finally it's working. Okay, great. So this is how an individual design looks like. And the interesting thing to note over here is that you have revisions. Just like you have Git on for code, right? You use Git on a daily basis to find out how your project is going and to commit your code in a very, very efficient way. Designers don't have that, right? It's very difficult to find, to create design revisions. And this tool allows you to do that. So you can see that I have created two different revisions. The base version of this looks like this, and the latest iteration looks like this, right? So if you're a developer, you can actually go through the different revisions, and in case you've already done revision 1 and you have to make the changes for revision 2, you can just look at the diff between 1 and 2, right? Just like you would do in code, and just implement those changes. So as a developer, it makes your life really simple. The other cool thing is, let's go into a specific design. You can comment and you can like collaborate with your designer on this. This is very similar to other tools like Zeppelin. So let me actually have a comment on this. So let's say I want to talk to my designer about this, and this doesn't look like because it's not aligned properly. I can just give that feedback to my designer right from this interface itself. Right, so this is very interesting. Apart from this, Gallery has a lot of unique things, right? Which is this new inspect mode. In inspect, you can go through the various components of the design and see how it's built. So for example, I have this selector, and I have another selector at the bottom over here. It's an edit text. And I can see what is the spacing between those elements. I can see the size of these elements, what is the padding with respect to the outside, to the whole application. I can even click over here and see what is this. Is this, like what kind of component is this? You can see at the very top over here, it says it's a tab, right? And the cool thing is the reference documentation for tabs is right here. So you can just click on this, and it takes you to the documentation for tabs, right? And you can go down and see how the design has been created. And the great thing is, if you're an iOS developer, Flutter developer, or web developer, the documentation for all of that is also right there. It's very simple to use, and it's very, very powerful. Apart from, cool, thank you. So apart from that, if you want to see what font is this, it's basically telling you that this depart word is basically a caption, and you can go into the style guideline for this and see, what is the caption is of type railway, right? This is the font that they're using. For some reason, the font size is not correct. I'm guessing this is beta software, so it's not working properly. But apart from that, a lot of information in this, and gives you a lot of confidence in building software. Another cool feature is this appearance, where in case you're doing a presentation or designing or like collaborating with your designer, you can go into full screen mode and change the look and feel of this prototypes. You can add, let's say, a background of a pixel 2, right? Change the background. You want to make it look professional, and do a presentation to other people, right? Along with this, they've also included a new companion app for Android as well as iOS. That means you can download the app, sign into your account, and then have access to all your designs. And you see it right on your phone in a full screen mode. So it's a very interactive process. And unlike other apps, this actually works, right? So you can see how the whole design looks on your phone. It's a very effective app. It's there on Android as well as iOS. Okay, so that's about the Gallery application. In case you want to see how it works, you can share this with other people as well and invite them. It's a very collaborative process. Okay, so that's a bit about Gallery, and it's a very useful tool, and it's completely free. You can just log in with your Google account, and it just works. Another note, you don't have to export your designs just from Sketch. You can do it from any other tool, like XD or InVision. With Sketch, it's very easy. It's just one click. But with other tools, you have to manually kind of export and import it, right? So that's a bit about Gallery. Other stuff. So that's not the entirety of the tools. Google has worked a lot to create even more tools. Let me give you an example of this tool called the Speck Viewer. So if you go to the developer documentation or the design documentation on this page, this is material.io. At various places on this website, you'll find very interesting tools. There are not tools in the traditional respect, but there are very interesting components that they have created. So they have this thing called exploring layout, and this is throughout the application. You can just click on this, and it shows you a very interactive breakup of the different components in this design. So it tells you that the text over here is aligned to the other text, right? So text, many a times the design is, we've seen that a design doesn't really look like the final application. This is typically because of text alignment, right, in Android, because text is base aligned. And for a long time, this base aligned support was not there in TextView, right? TextView Compat has just recently brought this. But because of this, if you see designs, right, they look a little different from the actual development result. So just by looking at this, you can make an idea that, this is how the text is supposed to be aligned. It gives you that perspective and helps you create better, more compliant applications. If you're interested in seeing what kind of fonts they are using, you can just click on text, and it gives you that ability to see what fonts, what are the sizes, right? can also see colors. You can see shapes and elevations. And finally, you can also see what components they're using. For example, this bottom part is very interesting. Just by looking at the design, it's very difficult to find out what is the component, the Android component that they are using to implement this, right? And with these interactive prototypes, you can see that they're using the bottom sheet, right? So I can just click on it. It takes me to the bottom sheet documentation, so you can see how they might have created all of this, right? And how they can customize it. So this is very interesting. This is just one of the tools that they have released. And there's a lot more to this tool. You can just click on ruler and actually measure different parts of the whole design, right? Gives you like measurements in case you want to see how something works, which is very, very interesting. Okay, next, the final tool is called Color Picker. Okay, this is also a very interesting tool. It's a web tool. So let me open Color Tool. It's at material.io/tools/color. So when you're creating a design or just seeing how a design would work, you can use the color to see how the color will impact the design. So they've got a couple of predetermined designs over here. For example, a simple page with a fab. They've got a couple of tabs, cards, and so on. What they've done is allow you to play with color. So in this case, I will just select, again, blue as my primary color, right? And select a secondary color, which is a yellow, right? So it allows you to play around with colors and see how it looks before actually implementing anything. You've got the same kind of color picker abilities, the accessibility features that we talked about in Sketch over here as well. So you can see that, blue is the primary color over here. It's an indigo. And if you have black text, it's basically telling me that you have to have a 97% opacity on that text to make it legible for everybody, right? It's also telling me that if you have white text on top of it, you have to have a minimum 51% opacity. It's also telling me that if you have a normal size text and not large text, it's not going to be legible, so don't try it, right? And the same thing for the secondary colors as well. So if you use white text on a yellow background, it's not going to be legible. The great thing over here is that you can change this. So I can go on this color picker over here and change the color of this. So just select a custom shade. Let's select a red, right? And you can see that it's giving me the option that in case I'm selecting red, it's legible, right? With a 52% opacity. That's the minimum opacity I should have, and it will be completely fine, right? So a very powerful tool, very simple, web-based, but gives you a lot of the same capabilities. Okay, so that's about Color Picker. And they've also got new icons, which I talked about. You can download it. They are, again, open source. You can modify them and update them. So hopefully that was a good idea, right, about what is Material Design 2 all about, right? It's not just about the design guidelines. A lot of it has to do with the implementation of that. Right? There's a lot of components, there's a lot of tooling around it to make your life easier. So why should you use material design? Because it'll help you focus on your work, right? If you have a business problem to solve, you can focus on solving that rather than focusing on creating individual components and buttons. Like rely on their open source code, so that you can focus on building code faster on top of that and create applications which work on Android, iOS, Flutter, and across platforms. Again, it's very extensible in nature. If you're doing something very complex, you have the ability to do that, right? So hopefully that gave you an idea about why you should use material design. It's actually designed to make your life simpler. And it's not just about the design. It's a lot more than that. So that's it from my side. Thank you. And in case you're interested in seeing the presentation, it's available at bit.ly/material2.